welcome, welcome. Good afternoon. The scattered remnants of the morning, or the first blossoming of the afternoon here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Loren Niemi. I am a storyteller. And many, many years ago, 1984 to be exact, in Toronto, Wisconsin, or Toronto, Ontario, I was sitting in Dan Yashinsky's kitchen with 5 other storytellers, and people started to sip whiskey and say, "Oh, did you ever hear the one about? Did you ever hear the one about? Oh, that reminds me of that. Yeah, that reminds me." And it went on like that until 4 in the morning, when Dan looked at us and said, you know, you guys, some of you have to work at 9, and some of you have to work at 11, so we should probably stop." But that process of storytellers just in conversation and prompting each other to what they remember or what they appreciated or what they've thought about, without necessarily having it be in their standard repertoire, was what was really interesting. Not the stories that you tell all the time on stage, but those stories that you sometimes think, the audience, I don't know. Or the ones where you just say, here's one I'm still working on, or here's something I used to tell and I don't tell anymore. Oops, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, for the Texas version of this, I'm going to get us started. I have a little question I will use with Alton and with Lynn to just begin the conversation, and after that, I'm going to pretty much try to stay out of the way, although I may pop in occasionally. And at some point, I have a second question to ask them, and we'll see how that steers the boat. Which reminds me, someone remind me, how long do we have time-wise?
90 minutes till 3 o'clock.
Till 3 o'clock? Okay. Oh, good. We got plenty of time to.
Where's the whiskey?
Actually, across the street at Anderson's.
Yeah, I heard about that place.
I had some sarsaparilla at lunch, and it was fabulous. So, okay. Anyway, so I'm going to sit down. Shift the focus, and here's the question I'm going to start with.
Dun, dun, dun,
Dun, dun, dun, dun, dun. Right, yeah. When I look back at my own development as a storyteller, there was a moment where I decided there was a moment when I decided that there were people I was looking to as models, people who were mentoring me whether they were conscious of it or not. But they were storytellers who were offering a way of approaching the art. And so my question is, who would you identify as those mentors and models who had the biggest influence on you at the start?
Oh, thank you. To start, I would have to say my daddy, who was my favorite storyteller. His name was Edward Macklin Cooper, or Edward McClin Cooper, depending on which part of the family was talking about him. He was born in Tennessee. He was a member of the Tuskegee Airmen. In the last graduating classes. And he was one of the few that had several designations. He was a bombardier, he was a pilot, he could be a navigator, and I know I've left some things out. But he would tell folk tales, and he would make up stories when we were going somewhere. Nobody ever thought about writing them down. When I was older, started to research some of the folk tales, because when I was little, of course, my father made up everything, I thought. And I found out that they were rooted in old Appalachian folk tales. some of Black Appalachian heritage, some of Scots-Irish heritage, as my father was, and other cultures in the Appalachian region. My second favorite storyteller was my grandfather, my pop-pops, whom I tell people was a tall tale teller, but Grandma Jo said he was just a liar. And I learned that skill from him. When I was almost 4, my mother said I could lie like a champ, but it didn't necessarily make any sense. It just made folks laugh. But those are skills that impacted my storytelling, imagination, creativity, the voices that I share. Sometimes the gestures are a kind of cell memory from my daddy and my pop-pops. When I started looking into storytelling as something beyond what I would do with my children or my preschool class, I had some wonderful mentors, and one of them is Miss Elizabeth. First time I saw Miss Elizabeth was at the Haunting in the Hills Storytelling Festival at Big South Fork, Tennessee. And I was so excited, so thrilled, because I looked up to her so much. She was absolutely wonderful. And that voice of hers could demand your attention without her ever having to speed up what she said. And we were staying in the same lodge or cabin, and I dreamt about her. That first night, I dreamt about Miss Elizabeth. And the next morning, I was so excited. I said, Miss Elizabeth, I dreamed about you last night. She said, you did? I said, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I dreamed that you were wearing a pair of footy pajamas. This is my first conversation with Elizabeth Ellis. And she took a breath and she said, I would love a pair of footy pajamas. And then we really started to carry on conversation, and she became more human to me, not a goddess of storytelling, but a master of storytelling. And she listened to my stories and told me what I was doing effectively. And that was my first mentoring from a storyteller. The next one was Diane Ferlat. I met her at a library. She had come to speak to librarians to teach them in Columbus, Ohio. And one of the librarians at the time was my friend Connie Pottle, who invited me to come and listen. And when the session was over, I was looking through used everything. I have way too many books, and that is not a sin. And I was looking for albums, real albums, of Jackie Torrance, whom I had also met, and she helped me to feel more confident about the fact that I am a stutterer and I had a speech impediment. And trying to go to the next level of storytelling, sometimes I was self-conscious about that. She said, think about your stories. You're not supposed to be thinking about that. And her voice, again, a voice that was so powerful, I wanted everything that I could find about her. And up comes Diane Ferlat, and I'm thrilled that she's talking to me, and she says, what you looking for? And I told her, and she helped me find 3 albums of Jackie Torrance's work. 2 of them were the same album, but since there were 2, I took both of them. And another one. My next mentor, honestly, was Debbie Thomason. Nope, that's wrong. J.J. Renault. And she came to Ohio for a conference, and she knew Diane, and she said, Diane told me to give you a present. And she taught me about how to do a juba pat, where you lift your hand up. I was taught that by J.J. Renault. But we became good friends, and we would send messages to one another. And she gave me the last copy of her audio cassette. because she wasn't going to make them anymore. I still have it. But she emailed me around New Year's, and she said, "What are you having?" I said, "The usual. I'm making Hoppin' John right now." And she sent back the email, "Shut up. I'm in North Dakota with my husband's family. They don't make Hoppin' John here. Hoppin' John, beans and rice, chopped onion, good stuff." She said, "But there are a lot of Jello molds."
Yeah.
And then came Debbie, whom I followed from tent to tent to tent. Still a little concerned about my pacing, my nervousness, I watched Debbie slowly, gently move through story, and with her voice take control of the tent. And then she would stop. And in that pause, you got to assess what she had said. I followed her from tent to tent, and then we got to tell together at the Moonshell Storytelling Festival. And when I came down from the stage, she didn't really know me, but she said, "Your pacing and your pauses were wonderful." I said, "Thanks. I learned them from you." And we've been friends ever since. So I think those are the people that influenced me the most, besides just listening to all storytellers and finding what works effectively in what they share. You can learn from everybody, if not how to do something, how not to do something. And that's what I tell the students that I coach. Alton?
Wow. Well, I was lucky in that I had actual mentors who actually took me on as apprentice. They're ethnotech, Robert Kikuchi Ngoho and Nancy Wong. I was walking down, first time I've ever been to Jonesboro, National Storytelling Festival. I'm walking down the street. This Japanese woman and this black man stopped me. They looked at me. She's all excited. She goes, "Oh, are you a storyteller?" I looked at them. I just became a storyteller. I looked at them and said, "Yeah." Oh. Do you know Robert and Nancy? No. Who are they? And they said, "Oh, here. I'll give you their addresses." And turned out this woman was Motoko and her husband Eshu Bumpus. And I had no idea who they were. And so I wrote Robert and Nancy saying, "You don't know who I am, but this funny Japanese lady said that I should talk to you." And they happened to be coming to my town to do a festival. And I said, "All right." Well, I introduced them and I met them and said, "Oh, we're heading up to Portland." I said, "I live in Portland. Let's go have dinner." I said, "Okay." And we're sitting there and she says, "Well, we have this apprentice program." I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Okay, well, we'll send you this form." 8 pages with essays and all kinds of stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, whatever. I don't know what I'm doing. And lucky enough, they took me on as an apprentice, and I would fly down every couple of months. I'd fly down, spend a long weekend with them, learning to do what they do. And the thing that I learned the most from them is how much work it actually takes to perform at their level of excellence. I mean, they've been in the business for 30 years. They travel the world telling stories, and I was just kind of in awe of how much work it takes and how tightly choreographed, what it means to the stylized gestures and, things like that, the look, the facial expressions. And, like you, I also had a speech impediment. As a kid, I could not pronounce S's, and I was a little self-conscious of that. But in fact, the first time I did any kind of public speaking, I break out in hives because I didn't want to do any of this stuff. And, but I guess looking back upon it now, the other people, I guess not so much official mentors, but people I just emulated. Storytellers that could transport me away. I remember I was at the National Storytelling Festival and I was listening to J. O'Callahan tell one of his stories. At the end of the story, I was at the edge of my seat, I was barely breathing, and I realized I have been somewhere else for the last 30 minutes. This is cool. I want to be able to do this. I think Carmen Didi was another one who could do that. There are a few tellers that could do that. Just transport you away. You're somewhere else. And that's what I aspire to become, when I grow up and become a storyteller. But it just, again, listening to a lot of tellers and saying, okay, I like that. I can use that. Or else, gee, that's how they did that. And just being curious. And people are very giving. I remember Choctaw storyteller. Tim Tingle.
Tim, yeah.
Tim Tingle. I was Tim came, I was at the storytelling festival, I became his driver. I was driving around. I was lucky enough to accompany him to a Native American elder's house. And he conducted an oral history interview. And I happened to have a digital recorder. I said, yes, you can use my digital recorder. And he basically had a conversation with this gentleman. And a couple weeks later, that elder passed away. And then he said, you know that recording, they would like to have it. I said, no problem, here, I'll send it to you. But the whole idea was the fact that his gentle way of doing oral story, or collecting oral histories and just talking to people. And that's what I just, again, something I picked up, said, wow, this is a skill, this is important. And to preserve the stories of elders. That's the reason why whenever I had teach a class and people talk about storytelling, I said, no, go talk to your cousins, your aunts, your uncles. Because people, when they pass away, they take their stories with them. And this is important because maybe not you, maybe not your children, maybe your grandchildren or great-grandchildren. They want to know, how come we're living here? Where did we come from? Who are these people in these photographs? You know, I think that's, preserving those stories, I think, are important.
Yeah, it's really important. Tim gave me some ideas on how to do jump tales for large groups of people because his timing was just spot on. And I tried it for the first time, not trying to be Tim, but adding those aspects of story sharing for a group of students who were forced to come to a storytelling event. And so I told it's a silly, scary story, but there's nothing better than seeing a group of high school students who are trying to be cool all jump at the same time and then look at one another and go, whoa. And it worked every time. So I'm grateful to Tim for just watching and picking up from him how to use those cues. And somebody I left out is right here on the stage, Loren. I don't know if you remember, you came and did a workshop on creatively developing your stories at some festival in Ohio when we were still having quite a few. And you encouraged, not putting the limits on your creativity, not trying to evaluate it by somebody else's standard, but just play with the stories. And I came up with a story that is actually Chicken Little, but there's a detective who's going around to see what happened to the birds, and eventually he is tired and he stops at Foxy Loxy's gumbo house to have a gumbo that is made with several kinds of bird. And I have to thank Loren for that because he helped me to pull the stops off. What might people think about this? That part doesn't matter. When you're developing your story, what matters is, are you being true to the story and true to yourself? And because of Loren, I could tell some personal stories that my mother told me I should never tell. So you kind of opened my mind to what I could do.
Okay, thanks. One of the things I remember most from those Ohio conferences and festivals was 3 or 4 times I was there with Catherine Wyndham.
Yes.
And every time I was there with her, she would say, I'm going to retire. And this is my last festival. And I said, I expect to see you next year. And there she would
and
be.
She'd be there. Yep, she sure would.
And after 2 or 3 times, I said, so what happens to your retirement? She says, well, somebody asked me to do something.
Yeah, I think she wasn't going to retire until nobody asked for her. And of course, everybody was going to ask for Miss Catherine. Yeah.
So I want to know, what did Tim Tingle tell you about jump tales?
It was just watching him, and he would be talking softly, and everything would be going along, and without doing the movement that people seem to think they need for a jump tale, he would just suddenly lift his voice up. And then he'd go along again, and it would be very, very calm, and people were kind of anticipating, oh, he's going to make us jump now. He's going to make us jump now. And he didn't. And then a little bit later, when people started to relax back into their chairs, he'd make them jump again. And that works very well with high school students.
That's very cool.
Yeah, he told me that I could tell one of his stories because in my father's heritage, there's also Choctaw. And I told him I can't do that. It's your story. And Tim was generous enough to say, no, it's your story too. It's your family. And so a few times Tim and I would be on the same stage and he would use his drum and I would use a small shekere, a rattle from West Africa. And we would sing together Amazing Grace and the Cherokee Morning Song, playing them together. And the first time we did it, it went so well. We thought, we got to do this again. We got to do this again. And so we did it at another event. It went very, very well. The next time, I don't know if we were just kind of feeling our oats or we were just too confident, but the timing was off. And Tim started in a different key than what we had practiced. And it's like, okay, we got to retire this. You know, the storytelling gods are telling us you're getting too big for your britches. Settle down, settle down. But there's so much you can learn just from listening to other tellers and observing what they do. And that's a cross-cultural thing. You have to be open to the possibilities. I have told stories, as I said, my mother would say, oh, you can't tell that story. Or you shouldn't tell that story. That's my guidance that I should go ahead and tell that story. You know, but you also need to know where and when it's appropriate. You know what I mean? I wouldn't tell the same stories at a church conference that I might tell at a coffee shop or some other gatherings. In fact, I'm going to be doing a session that includes stories and laughter exercises for one of those meetups where people are coming to get acquainted with others for potential dates. And I'm going to be telling stories to them. And what I'll tell there is not appropriate for the church group. But
what you don't know is that Lynn is an actual certified yoga laugh instructor.
yeah, that's a sideline. It came about, but it's actually a paying sideline, y'all. So word of mouth brought it to the corporate levels. And now I have taught laughter exercises for Johnson & Johnson. What is it? Bath and Body Works. A group that organizes volunteers for corporate events. I forget the name of that group, but I've reached the corporate level, which is very surprising because I did not promote myself for that. But if you're ready and you do your best, you never know who's out there. And the doors may start to open just because you did the right thing at the right time for the right people. And believe me, those corporate jobs, oh my goodness, they pay very, very well.
Yeah, and Tim Dingle is, again, he's very generous. And I remember I asked him if I could tell one of his stories. It was one of his trademark stories, but it was because we were on Maui, and we had to go. There was the theme of this thing. We're at a private school, and they said the theme of this thing was collision between cultures. And Tim has this great story about the slaves running away from the white people into Choctaw land.
That's the story.
Yeah,
Yep.
and you know, and it has singing in it, has chanting in it. And when Tim gave me the permission to tell that story, I memorized the singing, I memorized the chanting, and there's usually a drum beat in there. And here I was, you know, I'm telling the story because that was the story that was appropriate for this school and the theme. And I didn't have a drum, but Lynn had her drum. And she knows the story. She knows it. And so she's drumming along as I'm chanting part of the story with that heartbeat of the land, and she's drumming along. And, you know, again, that's collaboration, listen to stories, and allowing that exchange between the synergy happening there and being open to that. And honoring the story. For me, it's always about honoring the story. It's not about the teller. It's not about, I'm just what they call in Africa the hollow bone through which the story comes from. And it's the story that's the important thing.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Alton. It shouldn't be look at me. It should be here's a gift. Here's the story. I'm behind it. Of course, I'm the narrator, I'm the actions, I'm the voices, I'm the atmosphere, I'm the plot, but not me, not me. The story is at the forefront and people's responses to the story. I should kind of disappear behind that. And that's another thing about working with teenagers, who honestly aren't my favorite group to try to tell to. That's work, honey. Sometimes that is just work. But when I share, I ask them to break them down into smaller groups so we can be a bit more personal. Now, in those groups, usually there are some students who can relate and they want to tell me their stories. They want to come up and talk afterward. They want to be involved in more than that. But then there are those other ones that will come up to me and say, oh, I like your beads. Are you a Swiftie? And I know they didn't pay one bit of attention to the story. They were more involved in how do I look, what am I wearing, what kind of earrings I have on. And that's okay. If that's their story, take it and go with it, because I can't be everything to everyone. But there are those ones, as I said, who they want to come up and talk, really talk. They want to share their own stories. They come up with ideas of their own. They want to be more involved. And that's what keeps me going in those circumstances.
Yeah, I was in Northern Ireland this past fall, and I was visiting Liz Weir. And we went to, there's a primary school where she basically volunteers her time. And she drugged me along, go tell stories. I said, okay, great. And I told an Asian folktale. And then she just wrote me along and said, I went back to that school and people insisted that I was the one who told them the Asian folktale. I'm going, but you don't tell Asian folktales. No, you told the Asian folktale. But they insisted that I was the one who did it. I said, that's great because I disappeared, but the story was there. Yeah. And that's what we kind of meant. The whole idea is that, you're taking a step back and distancing yourself, and the story, the painting, the thing that you, emotion that you expect, the images they see, that's theirs to go and take.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. Sometimes the storytellers blend into one storyteller in people's minds. For example, we used to joke about it, but it was a reality. We knew that if Diane Ferlat told at the National Storytelling Festival the year before, she probably wouldn't be telling the next year. And it would probably be, instead of Diane, it would be Charlotte Blake Alston, or Lynn Ford, or Donna Washington, just a few names. They would rotate the Black female storytellers. And from that, there were some new festivals that seemed to pick up on that idea. We can't have more than one. And Diane used to joke about that. When we would get together and we'd start to talk, she would say, we're clumping. It scares the white people. Split up. Don't tell her I told you that. But Charlotte called me one time. She'd just been at an event in Pennsylvania, and I'd been there the year before. She said, Lynn, what did you tell those children when you were telling in the graveyard? It was ghost story night. And I had to think really hard. And I said, I think for the younger ones, it was just a goofy version of the ghost with one black eye. She said, do you know, some of those children came up to me and told me they wanted me to tell them the story that I told last year. Now, Charlotte Blake Alston and I look nothing alike. But we laughed about it, and after that, it was a joke. We'd end up it started to change, and we'd end up at the same place at the same time. And she'd say something about, which story are you going to tell? And just to make sure, because some of our stories overlap. And we would talk about that so that we would have a full set, a full program. And our joke would always be, yeah, because we have to be careful, because we look so much alike. We don't want them to confuse us. We look so much alike. The reality is that each storyteller has his or her own voice, his or her own way of sharing a story. Even if we share the same story, it won't be the same coming from any of us. And people have begun to make that distinction, to recognize the individuality of each story, even when culturally they are from the same family of people. And I think that's really, really important. Honestly, if you think about it, except for one core group, we are all hyphenated Americans, So you've got a backstory that is very special to your own storytelling, and you should keep that in mind. Just because you like a story that I share that comes from the Appalachian region doesn't mean that your voice is the one that will honor it. In particular, when people try to fake twangs and try to say y'all, when in their childhood they never heard anybody say y'all, and we don't say it that way anyway. And I try to emphasize that. I have coached children who thought if they were telling a jack tale from the Appalachian region, they had to talk with some kind of twang. Well, when you come from Utah, you don't have a Tennessee twang. So make it your own, There's nothing wrong with you sharing that story. It is an old folktale with roots in the British Isles and various variants of that came into the hills. It has been blended with stories from other people at times. Make it your own. Give credit to where you heard it or where you found it and why you're telling it. Don't just pull it out and act like that's what you lived with from the time you were a child.
Yeah, I think that's important. Whenever you tell a story, I always tell people, when you get, why are you telling the story, and what is the gift? What is it you want to leave your audience with? What image, what action, what thoughts, right? And that's kind of important as far, again, as you figure, when you weigh what story you want to tell, why do you want to tell a story? What's important about that story to you that makes you want to go and share it with others, and what do you want to share with others as far as that goes? But as far as interchangeability. All us Asian storytellers, we all get together and we all say, okay, same thing. If I'm telling nationals this year, you won't see me again for another 3 or 4 years, because they'll bring in Motoko, they'll bring in, Ethnotech or someone else. In fact, Robert and I, he's one of my mentors, and I used to wear a ponytail, and both of us wore ponytails, and because we kind of look similar, and because people don't see us very often, and never on the same stage, because we never act. We'll never have two Asians on the same bill for any festival. And so lots of times people will stop me and go, "Oh, how's your wife?" And I look at them and go, "Oh, you mean Robert?" And they look at me kind of funny. In fact, Robert and I kept saying, we email each other, "Hey, it happened again." And we were thinking of getting T-shirts saying, "I'm the other guy." But yes, and so that's again. Since I cut off my ponytail, we still kind of have that similarity there, but it's more the stories that we really want to emphasize here, and not so much the teller, and not so much the feelings, but it's what it is that everyone has different life experiences, right? So if I say yellow flower, everyone has a different picture of a yellow flower, a daisy, a rose, whatever's, a marigold. But it all depends upon your own life experiences, and the images I create, that I describe to you, that's your own personal feelings there. And that's what you take home, and why the story is important to you. And if it touches you and resonates with you, great.
Yeah.
So this brings up the other question I was going to ask, which will get you guys to, hopefully, to actually tell story. And that is, what story currently do you feel a lot of juice about, but has not entered into your performance repertoire yet?
Oh.
You know, is there particular things you're working on? Is there a particular genre that you're exploring?
I'd have to look at my notes, Loren, but um, actually, I have been considered one of the top 20 ghost storytellers in the United States. And I love spooky stories, not necessarily slashers or blood, guts, and gore, but the kind that creep into your brain and stick with you. So you're kind of looking into the dark corners of the room before you go to sleep. Those are the ones that I like to share. And so I'm actually working on what some might call horror stories right now. And Dr. Joseph Sobel said that I believe in divine justice and righteous anger. So if there's someone who would be considered abusive, in reality, they're going to be the villain in my story, and they're going to die. And if there are children in my story, you have to be careful about those children, because little children aren't necessarily innocents. At the same time, they are very open-minded. So one of my favorite stories that I'm kind of working on now is about a little girl named Mary Stella. And the first line of the story is, Mary Stella was a strange child. And while her family is moving into their new home, the neighbor is watching them, lovely young couple moving furniture, and Mary Stella takes a wagon out of the moving van, and she puts a little cloth in it, and she puts stuffed animals in a tea set. And then she pulls it around to the backyard and down the alley into the graveyard at the abandoned church. And she sets up a tea party at one of the graves. And she puts out the tablecloth, the tea set, a one-eyed teddy bear, a raggedy rag doll, and her place, and she leaves the other place empty. And she's serving tea. And while she's working, she's humming a little tune. And the neighbor, Tom Grody, thinks she's just a very strange child. But one morning, when he gets ready to get into the truck to go to work, there's Mary Stella in her night clothes with her rag doll. And she's standing there, and he asks her, "What are you doing out here?" And she says, "Mr. Tom Grody, did you kill your wife?" And he stammers and he stutters and he says, "How can you ask me something like that? My wife just died not that long ago. What is wrong with you? What are you doing here?" He gets in the truck. He makes his way to work. He doesn't eat lunch. All he can do is think about Mary Stella. And when he finishes work that day, he comes back and he parks his truck and he goes over and tells her family what she had done. And they apologize to him and they say, "Mary Stella is a strange child." They said, "But you have to understand, she was born with a caul over her face." That's the afterbirth. And that gives some folks the sight. And she's the seventh granddaughter of the seventh daughter of a seventh son, and that might make anybody crazy. But we apologize. We'll talk to her. But he just keeps thinking about that. And the next time he sees Mary Stella with her wagon, as she makes her way down that alley and into the graveyard at the abandoned church and sets up her tea party, the sun is already starting to go down, and he walks up to her as she's serving invisible tea to those at her tea party, and he says, "Mary Stella, what did you ask me?" She said. She says, "I asked you, did you kill your wife?" And he asks, "Who told you to ask me that question?" And Mary Stella says, "Your wife." And he gets very close to her and he says, "Well, Mary Stella, I'll tell you, yes, I killed my wife, I threw her down the stairs and broke her neck, and everybody thought she'd had an accident. And I'll be safe, and everything will be all right, as long as nobody knows what really happened. And Mary Stella, someday, I'm going to kill you too. And Mary Stella says, no, Mr. Tom Grody. No, you won't. And she looks up at Tom Grody, not with the strange grayish eyes of Mary Stella, but with the dark brown eyes of his wife, Margaret. And she began to rise, and she began to change into a woman with long, dark hair, like Margaret. And he realizes that they are at Margaret's grave. And as he tries to step back, that thing reaches out toward him. And the hair of her and the flesh of her and the clothes of her fall to the ground in a puddle of flesh and blood. And a thing made of nothing but bone reaches out, grabs one side of his cheek, reaches out and grabs his shoulder. There's a twist and a snap, and the body of Tom Grody fell to its knees on the ground. And the head rolled toward the gravestone, the marker of Tom Grody's wife, Margaret. And from behind her gravestone comes the real Mary Stella. And she looks at that thing now made of nothing but bone, and the thing bends down toward her and says, thank you. And turns into a mist that rises into the darkening sky and disappears. Well, Mary Stella stands there and she looks at the head of Tom Grody. He looks a bit surprised. Eyes wide open, mouth hanging open. And she said, Mr. Tom Grody, I tried to tell you. I knew you killed your wife. She told me, Mr. Tom Grody. And you know what else she told me? She told me that she was going to rip your head clean off. And then Mary Stella reached down and picked up the head of Tom Grody by its hair, set it at the fourth place of her tea party, and sat back down and began to serve tea to the raggedy doll, the one-eyed teddy bear, and the head of Tom Grody. For you see, Mary Stella was a strange child.
What? That was amazing. That's well done.
I'm revising it a bit from the way I used to tell it. I want to tighten it.
It's pretty much there now. But
But that's the thing about who might be the protagonist and the antagonist in your story. As I said, I learned from Loren, never limit yourself. And I feel like children have a voice that should be heard. And children deserve to be recognized, not as little people, but as human beings who will one day fully develop. Depends on what we do. That'll make the difference for those children. In my family, there were a lot of them have gone on, but there were a lot of spooky people. And I was the one that wasn't afraid of them. My great-grandmother was said to be an herb woman or a yarb woman, a healer, a midwife, and some folks just called her a witch. And I was told that I seem to have inherited things from her. I have been asked to sweep houses before people move into them, to clear out the past and make the house open for whatever people bring in with them. It's not healing the house. It's just clearing the house. And when I told somebody about that, it was at a spooky gathering. And a woman said, "Oh, you should do workshops on that." I don't think so. I don't think that's going to set well with some people. But there was someone who said they wanted to give us a gift. I was at a storytelling festival, and they handed me a broom that was painted white, but it was only half the broom, the bottom half of the broom. Appalachian cultures, various cultures, that's a curse. And I had done very well at that storytelling festival, got a few standing ovations, and this person seemed a bit bitter. And she was handing me half a broom. And I didn't say thank you. You don't say thank you. And my husband said, "What was that about?" And I told him, "She's Appalachian too." And I took that broom and we carried it away from there, but I put it as far away from the house as I could in the trash. And when I put it back there, I said something I learned from my great-grandma. "I give back to you what you gave to me. May it be your blessing." You know, that woman got sick. Really, really, really sick, almost to the point of dying. Do you know how guilty I felt? And I thought to myself, this is all just old ways. And I don't have to believe that. I can let that go. And so I started doing some deep breathing and trying to get rid of what would be considered superstition by some and old ways by others. But I realized that there could be a danger in carrying those things into the next generation. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for the one who would feel that they needed to curse me in some way. It's not healthy for me to know how to get rid of the curse. But it makes for good storytelling. It's all material. So I can put that into a story now. But I would never, ever do something like that to someone. And I would never, ever have a workshop trying to teach people how to do this stuff. That's not what I'm supposed to be doing. You have to know who you are and be comfortable with it. And I'm not comfortable with that part of things. However, at one point, Miss Elizabeth said to somebody, "Don't get on her wrong side," talking about me, because she knows more about curses than anybody I know. And I thought, ooh, I don't know if that's a good rep to have.
Lynn Ford was a strange child.
I was. I was.
Alton, what about you?
Well, I think, well, I mean, I've done a lot of historic stories, and I still continue to do that. But I think where I try to stretch myself now is trying to write more humorous stories, more tall tales. I created a whole series of stories because I guess I was invited to a liars club, and the challenge is every time I show up this thing, they ask me to do this. I write a new story. And so that's my challenge, kind of continues to stretch that muscle. So I created this whole world of me growing up in Hawaii with my imaginary friend who doesn't exist, Kyoki, and he's my best friend. We always do all kinds of crazy stuff together, and always has explosions and things that go boom. And that's one of those things. I think, but again, the newest thing that I've been working on again is, collecting true paranormal stories, things that actually, I mean, before I used to do lots of research and come up with stories. I asked for permission to tell these stories and things like that. But now it's like, okay, this is something totally different. It's like, okay, I'm actually seeking out people, talking to them, interviewing them, and then using all the skills I have as a storyteller. Does it have, synthesizing from what they've given me? Does it have a beginning, a middle, and an end? How I can do the historical research. What is the background of all this stuff? And you find stories in the strangest places. I mean, I was in my dentist's office, and they said, "Well, what are you working on now?" And I told them, "Yeah, I'm collecting real paranormal stories." They said, "Oh, did you know that our office is haunted?" I said, "No, tell me." And here's the dentist is going on and on about this stuff because this was an office owned by my first, one of the dentists I first had. That He sold the business to a conglomerate because his wife was ill. He had to take care of her. And then he passed away suddenly. I don't know how. And then this woman who was part of that conglomerate eventually bought out the entire business. He said, yeah, our place is on. He was telling me all these strange things. And then she's calling the person across the way who's, on the other side of the hallway who's doing record keeping. Oh, yeah, this is what happened. And pretty soon the entire office is there telling me all these guys. I said, tell you what. Let's make an appointment. I'll come at your lunchtime and then we'll just sit and talk and you tell me everything. But it's a whole different way of collecting stories that I've never done before. I mean, I've got all the elements. I've done oral history interviews. I've done historical research, and I love ghost stories. But now it's like pulling all that together and saying, okay, tell me something real. Tell me what's going on. Asking the questions, synthesizing things, and then putting together as a pitch to go and tell these people at Spooked at KQED and say, all right, is this something you guys are interested in? Yeah. So again, stories come up anywhere. And you just have to be open to that possibility and being able to run with that.
And I've got a story on Spooked.
Yeah, you're telling me.
Yeah, before you started in that position, I've got one story that I was embarrassed to tell because, as Alton says, I'm a strange child. But, at certain ages, you don't want everybody to think you're weird. So you keep all that to yourself. And then the person before Alton heard me talking about it just in a small group of storytellers, and he contacted me, would you be willing to have that on Spooked? And I went through the process, and you can hear the story on Spooked KQED now. So if you have something paranormal, don't be embarrassed about it. Just be willing to talk with Alton about it so it can become story.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff, I think, my background, like I said, as a kid, I was terrified of ghost stories because I would, had a wild imagination. I'd see things and I'd get scared. But as I grew older, as when I first became a storyteller or became aware of storytelling, I realized that growing up, everyone I knew had a ghost story. Something happened to a friend, or I heard this. And they're telling me, and so growing up in Hawaii, all kinds of things happen. Hawaii is a strange place. Many strange things happen there. But as I became an adult, I started listening and I realized that no one's telling the stories that I heard as a kid. And I realized that was because, a lot of families are connected or associated with a plantation lifestyle in Hawaii. And that lifestyle was dying out. And I said, I want to go and represent the Hawaii that I grew up in, the stories that I heard. And therefore, it's important for me to preserve this slice of history, this slice of life. And so I began collecting and telling those stories. And like I said, I think I'm the only storyteller that Glenn Gratz Estate has even allowed to go and tell a lot of the stories. And the reason why I tell a lot of these stories is because this is a slice of Hawaii. This is a part of Hawaii that people don't normally see, but then this was really real to us who grew up there. And so, again, it's about what is, that's what, when you, in your lifestyle growing up, what was it like when you grew up? What did you do for fun? Because again, all that stuff is gone now. It's transitioned to something else now. In fact, even the language. I grew up speaking, on the plantations, Pidgin English was a way of the supervisors telling the people from many different cultures, many different languages, how to get the work done. And so this Pidgin English was actually Hawaiian sentence structure with foreign words added into it, with different intonations and things like that. But that was what everyone spoke. I mean, there was the proper English that I'm speaking now that people, when you're speaking formally, but back home, everyone spoke Pidgin English. I grew up in that. And I learned how to become a storyteller. I went back home and, this story that has some characters who speak Pidgin English. I said, I'm in Hawaii. I'm home. I can lay it on thick and people think this is great. So I'm laying the Pidgin on thick and all the old timers going, yeah, yeah. And all the people in the 30s and 40s are going, what is he saying? What is he saying? And the old people are translating for them. And I found out later on that the language has changed. The language I grew up with, the Pidgin, the type of Pidgin I speak is now old Pidgin, and that the younger people, they don't know anything about what I'm talking about anymore. So that's what I mean, that preservation of that slice of life, and that you are unique to your lifestyle and the stories that you heard growing up. I think that's important to hold on to.
Yeah, definitely.
Can you give me an example of old Pidgin?
Oh, Pidgin. Oh, that's okay, man. Hey, tell you what, we go over there and we see all the kind of strange kind of stuff, man. Stuff you never even believe. And then all of a sudden the thing go back, but yeah, bullshit.
Alton was a strange child. We've been together in Hawaii several times to share, and he has actually become friends with my husband, even more so than with me. And my husband doesn't consider himself a storyteller, but if the two of them are in the same area, I'm left alone. They go somewhere and find their little corner and have their little whatever it is that they're planning to drink, and they're telling stories to one another. And I have to listen for the laughter, and that's how I find them.
This all happened. The first time we did it, we were on the Big Island of Hawaii, out in this little tiny town north of Hilo. It was an old converted garage back in the 20s and 30s. And this woman had taken over and turned it into a bed and breakfast. And we were there. We were hired, Lynn and myself and a couple of the storytellers. We were hired to go and perform for the community. And we're staying there. And I remember walking around. There's no street lights. There's nothing. It's out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm walking around, and I see Bruce, her husband, sitting there. Well, there's the road. He's sitting on one side of the road. We can see this beautiful view, the moon going up, and he's got a bottle of Jim Beam and a 2-liter thing of Coke. And I said, "What you got there?" He said, I got, bourbon and Coke." I said, "Give me one of those." And we're sitting down there. We're watching the moon go up, stars coming out, and we're laughing and telling stories. And he kept telling me about stories of what it was like when he grew up. And I said, "Oh, yeah, we sit there and we go in the cellar and the basement, we turn off all the lights, and we throw shoes at each other." I said, "What?" And he's just telling me these amazing stories, and I'm just laughing hysterically. And of course, we're solving all the world's problems. And it's ever since then, we bonded after that. And, ever since, whenever Bruce and I get together, "All right, tell me more stories." What it's like growing up. He has all these stories, and I kept saying, "It's amazing, you made it to adulthood."
It's true. It's true. But that first time when they first bonded, I wasn't sure if they were sober. I really wasn't. They were laughing so hard, and they would find some connection in a story to one another. And I thought to myself, I'm just going to have to sleep in the grass here, because neither one of them can get back to the hotel or the inn where we were supposed to stay. But Bruce doesn't consider himself a storyteller. But for some reason, he and Alton pull the stories from one another. And I heard things from Bruce as he spoke to Alton that Bruce hadn't even told me. And we'd been married for quite a while then, about firecracker fights in the basement of the house, throwing firecrackers and setting somebody's pocket on fire, and the shoe fights, throwing shoes in the dark. This is so sensible, so mature. And all I could think was, just pray on it, just pray on it. Lord, please don't let any of the children come out the same that Bruce did. But he's a good man, so, there's a kind of a counterbalance to everything. And I really appreciate the friendships that I've made with storytellers. It gives me more confidence as I'm sharing stories, but it gives me more hope for the world, because stories overcome any barriers, and I really do feel they're heart-to-heart communication. Once we've shared stories, in some way we're friends, even if we don't see one another again.
Yeah, and stories, again, they're so precious. Once I got a wild hair, when I first started, my first historical story I ever created, I got a wild hair. I wanted to go tell the stories of the 442 veterans back to them, is what I wanted to do. 442nd Regimental Combat Team, all Japanese American unit, fought in Europe, in Italy, and France. And I got this idea, I really want to do this, and I called up a close friend of the family, he's like an uncle to me. I said, "Uncle, I know you were in E Company in the 442. I knew you were a sergeant. I want to interview you because I want to tell the story." And he goes, "Oh, no. It's been 60 years. I'm still trying to forget." I said, "Okay." I backed off. I did the historical research. I put together the story, and I was invited to the 65th reunion of the 442nd. to tell their story back to them. Hilton Hawaiian Choral Ballroom, 1,200 people in the audience. Danny Noy is in the audience. People from the Pentagon in the audience. I'm about ready to go on stage, and my uncle comes up to me and says, "Oh, you know, I was at Hill 140. I looked at Hill 140. That's where Ted Tanoy won the Medal of Honor." He said, "Yeah, I was there. You see this one foot's all shorter than the other? I was hit in the ankle. I was evac'd out. I missed all that lost battalion stuff. 442nd saved the 1st Battalion, 141st Regiment, the Alamo Regiment from Texas. They were surrounded by a crack German division. They were able to save 212 guys out of the 275 that were trapped by this crack German division." And he said, yeah, I missed all that lost battalion stuff. And then he went off and talked to his friends, because it was basically a reunion of all these 442 guys. His wife, my aunt, comes up to me and says, "I've been married to that man for 55 years. This is the first I've heard of any of this stuff." So again, how closely held these stories are, and yet how precious they are, and how important it is to go and remember them.
Yeah. So one of the things that you've referenced here has been, and it's a common reference for many people in this room, is festivals. But my question would be, what else? Fringe festivals, cabarets, theater, television, podcasts? What other events, mediums, opportunities to tell have you had? Do you like to do? You know, what is the world for you beyond the festival circuit?
This is this is different. I also, as I
Supposed to
said,
be.
well, I also do those corporate events, and in part, it's story sharing. I'm a tutor for young authors at Thurber House in Columbus, but we always start our writing sessions with the spoken word. That levels the playing field for some who can't effectively get things on paper. I also tell, I used to tell a great deal within the prison communities, Orient Correctional Facility, Marion Correctional Facility, the juvenile detention centers. Some of that dried up because funding was cut, and then COVID came along and shut a lot of that down. And now they're trying to reopen art projects in those kinds of places. I tell for youth organizations. I tell for family centers. We have the second largest Somalian population in the United States, in Columbus. And when they gather to be taught some things that they might need to know, some of them very simple things like how to use an oven, or the fact that you cannot leave your children alone in your apartment and go to get the groceries. Some folks are used to, if I have to do something, the village will watch my children. In the United States, you leave your children with your apartment door open, someone's probably going to call the authorities on you for neglect and abandonment. So basic living skills that might be overlooked just because people have dared to come to a different culture in order to survive and lead a good life. And I share stories with them, and sometimes the women will tell me stories, and they'll tell me, tell that. And I'll say, oh, but it's your story. Wouldn't you like to tell? No. Some of the stories are hilarious. The women's tales that they won't tell in front of the men. They're hilarious. But at the same time, I have to honor them. These are stories that were gifted to me. They're not from my family's heritage. So I always keep that in mind. There's also telling at the summer camps and the campfires, and there's the Girl Scouts and the Boy Scouts and the whatever Scouts, and there are a lot of health organizations and corporate organizations that know that folks need to laugh right now. It's so important. So if you have humorous stories that you can share in some way, and interactive stories, there's a market for that too. That's all I can think of right now.
Yeah, I think for me anyway, festivals is kind of like the cherry on top of the sundae. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's great. But most of the, the bread and butter stuff in my world is like schools and libraries and things like that. And again, but the funding is drying out. So as far as, what the new frontier is going to be, I don't really know. I know podcasts, it's so overcrowded because the barriers to entry are so low. And so there's so many podcasts out there. And so voiceover work, a lot of that's going away because that's on the low end and the medium end because of AI. I think, I've had voice actors call me up and say, I want to get into storytelling because I know half of my work is going to go away in the next 5 years. I'm like, ooh, well, here's some financial reality about being a storyteller. You need a day job. And so it's like a lot of where else can you go and share stories? I think a lot of what I do is reaching out to underserved communities, people who haven't had a lot of stories, and try and tell their stories back to them. I've been invited into cultures to collect their stories and then tell the stories back to them. Because again, giving voice to stories or people who don't want to share their own stories, but they have it's important things to share and stay. And so a lot of it, what I do is collecting, preserving, and here's your story back to you in a way that everyone can enjoy it. I'm thinking about other things as far as collecting stories.
Creative aging,
Creative aging.
collecting stories.
Yeah, well, it's collecting the stories of elders before they go. When an elder goes away, they take all their stories with them and try and capture as many of those stories as you can to share with generations beyond, saying, here's your story, this is where you're from, this is what was important to you, and this is kind of as far as your elders go, and to share those stories, and so that you don't lose that connection, don't lose that cultural touchstone. Because certainly a lot of immigrant families, first generation is from the old country, second generation, no, you become Americans. Third generation is kind of like, well, where did I come from? So again, trying to help bridge that gap and try to give them the tools so they can access those things. I tell a lot of immigration stories because, unless you're Native American or Black who were brought here against their will, for the most part, guess what? You're an immigrant. We lose sight of that fact. And that's kind of one of the things that I do a lot of historic research and say, look, no, here are where people came from. This is the reason why they're here. And these are the struggles they had to go through. And if you look at the overlap of all that stuff, every immigrant group that came in basically had the same struggles. And you basically just change the names, and this same thing happened to them. And you see it progress from every group that has come into the United States. And we lose sight of that fact, and that we are a nation of immigrants. And that is the reason, part of our strength is the fact that we have multiple viewpoints and people from different perspectives and can conglomerate in a whole. That's the reason why I'm a scientist by training. And that the reason why native environments have thrived so much is because they have all these interactions of different species. Whereas your lawn right now is probably the same monoculture, the same lawn, it gets attacked and it dies and you don't know why. Well, guess what? It wasn't supposed to be there in the first place, and it's artificially being held together. Whereas if you have a balanced ecosystem where you have multiple things, yes, one person, one gets better in different conditions and they thrive and they kind of balance each other out. So again, these are just simple lessons that I've learned, in one part of my life. I'm trying to apply to others and give insight to other people.
Science guy. But the reality is, if you can take the story sharing and put it into the history studies, take your storytelling and connect it to science studies. I do a lot for students with English as a second language, so that there's always a translator there for me. I don't have to know how to speak the language. There are a lot of possibilities there. One of my favorite memories is doing a program where I told a rabbit story, what some folks might call Brer Rabbit. First, in what I tell the students is American business English. You need it to handle the business of the country. Then it was translated into Japanese for a group of Japanese students who were visiting at a university in Ohio. It was also at the same time translated into American Sign Language. So I would tell the story, and those who could understand it would laugh. then the Japanese students would hear that portion of the story, and they were a little gentler with their laughing. And then the American Sign Language would be translating it into sign language, and you would see the students cheering for it. But so we had to do it in waves. But it was one of the most amazing things I've ever been involved in. So if you can connect to studies in English as a second language, also go to your arts councils, see if they have teaching artists directories or artist directories, and get yourself listed. Go through that process. It opens doors and gives you a resume. Looking at state organizations, the education associations, the humanities organizations, just about anything. I can't think of anything that can't be connected to storytelling. And you can open the doors for yourself if you have that knowledge base. You've got to do the work for yourself.
Yeah, that just reminds me. I think a couple weeks from now, I'm at an art camp. Basically, they bring me in. I tell a story on whatever theme they're working on, and they create art projects based upon the images in that story. And then I come in the next day, tell them another story, and get more images and art and things like that. So little tiny things that you can leverage are possible.
And if you want to tell just for adults, my goodness, there's the coffee houses, there are certain bars, there are the breweries, microbreweries, there are spoken word events that pay you if you look for them. You don't have to always work for free. But like I said, you have to kind of do the research yourself and try and find some of those. And the moth type of storytelling, I believe it's in Scotland, where the programming is called The Moth and the Butterfly. And the first half of the programs for that group are personal stories, moth types of tales. Then there's a break. And the second half is spoken word of any kind. Folk tales, fairy tales, poetry, essay presentations, as long as you don't read your work. That's the only limitation that's put on it. And I keep saying, we need to do that here, bring it all together. And I managed to get that done one time, but I couldn't keep doing it myself, so we handed over the project to an artist cooperative. And they've taken it over. They call it Speakeasy in Ohio.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people, especially younger people, there's a thirst and a hunger for stories. And for the young people, the moth is what they consider storytelling. True stories, short tales, lots of impact, very emotional tidings. And I forget who, I had a conversation with some storyteller, where they said, this one woman, she was very upset with this storyteller who told a folk tale. Said, that wasn't a personal story. And he said, how do you react to that? I said, well, if that's all you know is this, whereas storytelling is a wide gambit of everything, folk tales, personal stories, true stories, historic stories. And so, it just one of educating people and things like that. But yeah, I think, yes, I think there is a market, there's a hunger, and the whole idea is that, you want to relate to something other than yourself. Again, as I tell people, if you can relate into that story, you buy in, you invest, then you go on a journey. And the storyteller, your job is to go and make sure that everyone goes on this journey, but they come back safe. And that you're leaving them a trail so they cannot get lost, and they bring them back safely home. That's your job as a storyteller. Unless
you want to make it a riddle, or you want to creep them out and leave them going,
Yeah, I always tell people, say, okay, you want to hire me to tell ghost stories? Okay, is it little kids? Then we tell them mystery stories. If it's younger children, okay, we tell them, kind of spooky stories with, good endings. And if it's adult, yeah, we tell them scary stories. But if it's teens, we pull out our stops and we just give it to them and make them look in the shadows when they leave. Mm-hmm. What else?
What else? Well, we're getting close to the end here. So
Yeah.
the question would be, not so much a question, but what would you offer each other?
What would we offer each other?
Yeah, as advice or as appreciation or?
Oh, I definitely appreciate being with Alton anytime I can be. He makes me laugh and I make him laugh, and we talk about what we're doing and kind of bounce ideas off of one another. And I appreciate that camaraderie. You don't necessarily have it all the time with everyone. And believe it or not, I'm a bit introverted in an extroverted career. You can do that. But when I'm comfortable with folks, usually it's because I've started to share stories and they've started to share theirs. And so I appreciate Alton being willing to share from his background, a huge background of knowledge, and he does a great deal of research. And I'm coming from a family folktale background, and the research that I did specifically for those stories at first, I appreciate seeing how Alton approaches a story and how much he puts into preparing it for folks. I guess if there was a comparison, I'd be the tortoise and he'd be the hare. You know, he's working, and I'm like, well, I could put this in there, and maybe put that in there now, put that in there, and he's working and he's working. So yeah.
Well, that's because, again, it doesn't come naturally to me. But no, I really appreciate Lynn because, again, for friendship, the storytelling community, by and large, is a very generous and helping community. I think people, oh, let me help you this. Here's some advice. Try it this way. And, I remember when I first met Lynn, I was just starting out as a storyteller. And Lynn pulled me aside and said, no. You got the chops. You're gonna do good, and you should go to nationals. And I said, you got to be invited. He said, no, you're gonna get there.
You can get there.
And so that encouragement, I've always appreciated about her. And of course, I love her spooky stories because I love ghost stories and things like that. But yeah, her very natural way, just her body of knowledge that she pulls from. Like I said, I gotta work. Yeah, I'm also an introvert and an extroverted thing. This is a learned behavior. And, it's like, no, I don't like doing this. Well, get me in front of an audience with a microphone. You guys are out there. That's good. You're not near me. But, and the whole idea is I had to learn how to do this stuff because I didn't like public speaking. What cured me is I had my last year in grad school and I needed a job. And I said, okay, get a job teaching. So I was an instructor at a university, and I had to spend there 4 days a week in front of like 40 kids trying to teach them something about software and computers. I'm going, But, getting comfortable enough and realizing that it's just excitement, and then I can just grab all that and put it into whatever I'm doing, whatever I'm saying. And, but again, getting that reinforcement, that encouragement from people saying, no, go ahead, try it. You're doing it this way. And I think I invited to exchange place at nationals, and Lynn kept telling me, tell the story that you feel good about, that you know. Don't try something new. Dance with the one who brung you.
Yeah.
That was probably the best piece of advice that I got. And I said, okay, well, I know this one story, and I worked it, and I told it, and then I got lucky, and this magic carpet.
He told a story the first time we were together. Alton, you told a story that creeped me out for the next 2 or 3 days. And I can't remember what the story was, but he went from the character who was the narrator into the ghost. And the lighting was perfect on the stage for him to do this. He put his head down, and in those days he had the ponytail. He put his head down, and he ripped off the ponytail, shook his hair, and looked up with this evil grin on his face. And I was like, oh my God, where did Alton go? I'll never forget that. I don't remember the story, though.
But I remember the effect.
I remember the effect of the story, yeah.
I think it was the samurai and the second wife who gets.
That's it.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of that. It's one of Lafcadio Hearn's stories. And it's about this samurai who promises never to remarry, and his wife extracts a promise from him. Okay, if you're never going to remarry, you can bury me in the garden. And he says, okay. But of course, everyone said, "You're a young samurai. You need heirs. You should marry again." So he says, "All right, fine. I'll marry again." And then he has to go and be in the castle to look after the master at night. And the ghost of the first wife, comes and say, "Not in my house. Not in my house. You must leave. Or if you ever tell him about it, I will tear you apart." Disappears. And then, she does it several times, and the samurai keeps saying, "Oh, no, it's just your imagination." And then, the last night, he comes back, lamps are guttering. He had 2 posted guards, the guards are frozen in place. He wakes them up, he sees this trail of blood and the headless corpse of his wife, and he follows it out to the garden. They follow it over the reeds and around the pond, and there, at the first wife's tomb, is this chittering thing holding the head of the dead wife. And he cuts it with his sword and rolls away, and the thing crumbles down into grave ashes. And there it is, with hands still clutching the hair of the second wife.
That's the one. That's the one. But did you see how he changed from narrator to the characterization? That just amazed me the first time I saw you do that. And I think we were at our next venue, and you were saying, I wonder what I should tell. I'm going, tell that. You could have told that one all the rest of the weekend. It just blew me away.
The glory of ghost stories, it's like there's always room for a good creep.
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Well, we are pretty much at the end of our time, and so I will say thank you to the both of you, and invite the audience to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Loren.
Thank you, Loren, for taking care of us.
Arranging this and taking care of us during it. Thank you very much. Let's give Loren a hand too, please.
All right. So I do believe the next thing is ice cream.
Ooh.
Ice cream for ice cream. So let's have at it. Thank you.
Alrighty.
Thank you very much. Thanks
Thank
for
you,
coming.
everybody. Thank you.